Hello and welcome back to NAS Compares, and straight away let's get down to it. Which should you be buying? Synology or QNAP? Which is right for you and which is best? Which one deserves your data? So let's get started. So you've decided to pull the trigger and buy yourself a NAS, a network attached storage solution. And don't get me wrong, well done. This technology is becoming more affordable and definitely more exciting. There's so much that it can do these days, and definitely these two are the big two brands right now that you should be considering. They're the front runners out there, and I would go as far as to say Synology right now is the one slightly ahead on the game. But it's neck and neck, and by the end of 2018 I reckon we're going to see a real stalemate between these two big companies. But that doesn't really help you, because you'll buy a NAS for the first time and you don't know which one you should be going for, because both brands have got a lot going for them. They seem to promise a great deal, but do they deliver? Well, today I want to talk about the highs, the lows, the advantages and the disadvantages, and why these two differ so greatly, and hopefully find out which one is best suited to your needs. So first and foremost, let's talk about software. Now on the screen there should be a graphic that denotes regarding the desktop there, because both of these devices arrive with their own user interface. When you access the NAS, of course you can access it as a network drive, so you can just see your usual file folder structure that your Windows or Mac operating system will show you. But both NAS providers, Synology and QNAP, give you the ability to, via the internet or the network, access a complete desktop environment and a multitude of first-party applications. Now, the way they've both gone about it is the first way in which you're going to be able to tell whether you should be buying a Synology or a QNAP, because although both of them give you a desktop interface with multiple apps and storage managers and video and photo apps and stuff like that, although it gives you all of those capabilities, they've both gone about it a little different way. Synology is moulded much more on the Mac model. Everything is kept as simple as possible, with all of the tough decisions and technical information hidden a few layers deep. So once you open up the interface, options are kept to a minimum and there are lots of default actions. So when you play a certain kind of file, a lot of things will happen in the background of the Synology without asking you to do it. Things like transcoding, like double checking codecs, like audio synchronization and stuff like that. QNAP, on the other hand, have gone for a slightly different method. They've gone more for the Android and, dare I say, Windows style. They've given you a lot of that technical information at the forefront. So whereas the Synology, if you wanted to know, for example, how big a file was, you had to go a couple of layers in, right-click, properties, search, click, calculate, and then you would get the size of a file. The QNAP, if you just highlight and select a file, like in Windows, it will tell you the size and the bit rate and stuff like that immediately. But it goes beyond that. If you're accessing your device via the internet or network, the QNAP will be able to give you, within one touch from that desktop setting there in front of you, you'll be able to see how much percentage the CPU is using, how much memory is being available, how much storage you've got currently available, the temperature, all that information from the NAS immediately. You might not want it, but it's there one click away if you want it, and some of the information readily there on the desktop on the bottom right. The Synology, on the other hand, you have to dig a few layers in. You have to go into control panel and then into hardware management settings and see that. And the same thing goes for if you want to check the status of your device. Generally, it will tell you the CPU, the RAM as a percentage figure, not actual figures. And on top of that, if you go to the top right of the screen, notifications and actions and background tasks are kept to a very small amount of visibility, and you have to dig a few layers in. Whereas with the QNAP, one click brings up half a screen of resource monitor with charts, graphs and the works. Now, this technical perspective does go beyond that. Now, the best way to describe it, if any of you out there owned Windows XP, if you owned Windows XP, then you'll remember the control panel. If you went to the control panel, you click control panel, and then you had a row of boxes that like all the way along the screen. And on that control panel, which shows you probably about 30, 40 things: add a program, remove a program, audio, sound, cameras, network, that sort of thing. When Windows Vista was released in the early 2000s, when that came out, control panel became 5 options, and it was a tree system where the top one, each option broke down to 5 more options and broke more, and you had to dig quite deep. That is the way these two companies have gone with their architecture. The Synology has, even if you go into their system settings menu, there's only about 9 options, whereas on the QNAP you have vastly more, because the tree dynamic doesn't exist. It's all the options are there for you to go through, whereas the Synology, you go for a few layers. So if you're more of a technical mind and you like to tinker, maybe you built your own PC and you enjoyed it, the QNAP is definitely the one for you. But with Synology, if you want things nice, easy, set up and forget, they're the brand for you. And that attitude is spread across the entire spectrum of their applications as well. So do bear that in mind when choosing between them. The next way to pick between them is mobile access, because both of them arrive with a host of mobile applications. However, the apps are for Android, iOS, and Windows. But with Synology, there are fewer first-party apps. There's about 8 or 9 first-party application, DS Photo, DS Video, DS Music, that sort of thing. And the way you access the device, once again, is a little limited. And by limited, I'm coming from a technical perspective. But with the QNAP, they have about 15 first-party apps. That is, first-party, by the way, means ones they built themselves. But on top of that, it supports a multitude of third-party applications as well over the mobile, something Synology doesn't give you. So again, there's that tinkering and that element of choice with QNAP that Synology doesn't give you, but what Synology does give you is a great deal more stability. Another analogy I would say is PC versus console gamers. So you guys out there, I'm sure you've picked a team already, particularly if you're an IT type. You've picked either you like to play your games on a PC or a console. Maybe you owned one and you flicked to the other, but there's no denying that consoles, although they have got a lower hardware spec available, they are far more stable. They're more expensive, but they're a far more stable, user-friendly platform. You never have to muck around with recommended specifications, you never have to muck around with directories, and the updates are automatic in the background. Whereas with PC, there's a lot more tinkering. There's making sure that your graphics card and your CPU and you've got the right memory, and at the same time you've got the modding community. That said, PC gaming is cheaper for higher, that's why it calls itself the master race, but it's true. So Synology is more like console gamers. It is a system that does what it's told with less tinkering from you. QNAP is more about PC gaming. Better hardware, the ability to tinker and refine the process, but of course there is a slight element of instability once you start tinkering with those things, which QNAP are more than willing to admit to. It's up to you, and they advise you not to tinker with things, but they give you the option to do so. That's another way to tell between them. On top of that, if we move towards the actual hardware, once again it does play true, because like for like, the hardware on Synology is lower than on QNAP. And a lot of that is to do with the way the two brands want you to access their product. Synology advertises itself as a purely network and internet access product. QNAP gives you network and internet access, but also localized access in a number of ways. You may notice from a graphic on the screen, there's a remote control there. QNAP gives you on most of their NASs have things like HDMI ports. They have far more PCIe based expansion slots to add ports. They have Thunderbolt connectivity as well. On top of that, they've got a direct attached USB access ports on the front on a number of their NASs that let you access their NASs over USB, compared with just the typical internet or network access. They arrive with remote controls. They've got Thunderbolt enabled NASs that give you Thunderbolt connectivity to their NAS devices, depending on which ones you go for. Don't get me wrong, again, that does bump up the price, but the hardware inside, and they have a better range of CPUs as well. Some of those AMD ones and the Ryzen CPUs are breathtaking, but only QNAP gives you that. But at the same time, Synology may well not give you direct access, remote controls, Thunderbolt and all those other options, but because it focuses on network connectivity, their network standards are brilliant and definitely higher than the guys at QNAP. So QNAP have diversified on a multitude of things, but Synology have focused on one and made it as good as they can. Once again, it comes down to you, whether you want to have HDMI access and keyboard and mouse use and stuff like that, or you want everything to be over the network. That should help you choose between these two companies. Going back to software, with regards to first and third party stuff, Synology has a whole host and support for its own first party apps, and it has some great Office applications, chat, their own email client software. They've got an Office doc that's quite similar to Microsoft Office and Google Docs. They've got Synology Moments, this great application that runs in the background. You can catalog all your photos using AI facial recognition. They've got the Synology Drive that's a lot like Dropbox, a one portal access point that gives you access to all of your files, lets you see PDFs, music and video files and all of those via a single access point, which is great. QNAP doesn't have most of these features, but what it does have is an enormous support for third-party apps. Things like Kodi, which is still unofficially supported but still available. They have the QNAP Club, a huge number of third-party unofficial apps which they allow to be installed on their devices. A lot of the third-party apps and cloud migration is greater on the QNAP than it is on the Synology, and overall you have a better diversity of applications on the QNAP than the Synology and a better support of third-party apps. But once again, that said, that can lead to instability, so you should be careful what you install and how you install. And if you're afraid of that instability and just want something that sits there and does the job, go for the Synology, because it's reliable as hell. It just doesn't give you the area of growth, and you will hit a glass ceiling a lot earlier than you will with a QNAP. Now, talking of third-party apps, we can talk about Plex media servers. It's one of the main reasons a lot of home users are buying NASs these days, to house their own growing media collection. Both of these two providers have Plex Media Server support. That is the ability to install the Plex Media Server app on a multitude of their NASs, make sure you double check which NAS you're going to buy, and host your own Plex Media Server, your own PMS. Horrible an acronym. That said, there's something called transcoding, and transcoding is when a file is changed in shape and type and format so it is better fitting to the destination device. If you've got an old TV that's network accessible, or you've got old files that you want to play on a new media device, maybe you've got giant 4K and 1080p files that you want to play on your tiny little iPhone. Transcoding changes the shape and format of a file to be best suited to the destination device. And if you're using a data plan with a phone carrier, whatever your phone provider is, you're going to want files to be as small as possible rather than eat up all of your data. Both brands, Synology and QNAP, support transcoding on a number of their devices. And when that happens, the files can be changed and transcoded on the fly with a lot of their flagship to top range devices. But in Plex, overall, more devices from QNAP support transcoding than Synology. And you end up with more CPU and memory being used on a Synology to transcode a file than on a QNAP in Plex. Obviously there are exceptions to the rule, but if you're looking for a Plex media server and you want the best possible raw power, chances are you should go for a QNAP. That said, once again, a little bit of tinkering, straight away easy time set up with the Synology, so do bear that in mind. Now, the last couple of areas I want to talk about is one, surveillance, and the other one is RAID. In terms of surveillance, both of them are pretty even on the hardware front. Both of them have their own surveillance software that is included with Synology and QNAP. Likewise, both of them have got CPU and memory options available on their varied selection of NASs to let you support anything from 10 cameras all the way up to 40 and 80 cameras in a shared environment. That's Internet Protocol IP cameras. But both of them have their own surveillance software, and they've both gone a slightly different route. And unsurprisingly, Synology have gone for the user-friendly, chewable, easy camera route, and QNAP have gone for the detailed, analytical camera approach. Now, that said, QNAP have released a new version of their surveillance software called QVR Pro, which is a far more user-friendly version, but it's still nowhere near as user-friendly as Synology's own surveillance software, and it's definitely something worth bearing in mind. So if you're buying a NAS for surveillance and you have almost no experience of CCTV cameras and you just want something that's going to record all that camera footage and send you SMS alerts and emails if someone walks in front of a camera, go for the Synology. If you want a greater density of control, route patterns of cameras, better access to the feed, and a better overall camera support with more licenses included, that's individual camera licenses with the software is free, more cameras equal more licenses, then go for the QNAP. Finally, I want to talk about RAID, because one of the other reasons that NASs are so popular is because these individual devices, once you've got a bunch of hard drives inside, you're worried that if your data's all inside, what happens if you lose a drive to hardware failure? Hard drives are the second most fragile part of any computer, the first being of course the power supply, but the second most fragile is the storage media. Now RAID helps you with that, redundant array of independent disks. If you have a bunch of data spread across these drives, RAID creates a system where data is duplicated or backed up the wrong word. It creates something called parity, which is like a blueprint of the other data in a larger scale. And RAID basically saves you for if one of the drives in your NAS device dies, your data is safe. And then you introduce a brand new drive and then the data rebuilds and everything's fine. Now both of them support the traditional RAID levels, as long as you get a NAS with at least 2 to 4 bays. So that's a RAID 0, which combines all the drives together into one giant volume. A RAID 1, which takes 2 drives and copies and mirrors the data between them, so you've always got a duplicate. There's RAID 5, where if you've got 3 or more drives, Data is written across those 3 drives with every time data is written across, one of the drives holds a little blueprint of the data. Each wipe, and the next wipe, the blueprint moves to the next disk and the next, and therefore your data is still accessible and retrievable in the event of a failure. RAID 6, same thing, but with 2 bits of parity, and RAID 10, a bit like RAID 1, but you have 4 drives, 2 of which are copying against the other 2. It's a lot more complex than that, but that's a be-all end-all of it. Now, both of them support those RAID levels, but Synology supports something called Synology Hybrid RAID. It's the ability to have a RAID consisting of mixed drives, and that's something QNAP doesn't offer you. Now, I know what you're thinking, why would I buy mixed drives like 2TB, Seagate, 4TB, WD, etc., etc.? The reason being is because later on you might buy drives today, but a few years from now you might buy bigger drives when you run out of storage. And an SHR, Synology Hybrid RAID, lets you introduce different drives and makes the most of that. So if you're upgrading your drives a few years from now, when you buy a new drive because your other ones are filled up or knackered, SHR will let you introduce new drives and different drives. Whereas on the QNAP, traditional RAID doesn't give you that option. Traditional RAID, you have to use the same disks, the same model, same speed, same capacity, everything has to be the same. And if you introduce a drive that's not the same as the others, the system will only see it and treat it as the lowest lowest capacity model drives. It doesn't matter if you have 2 terabytes, 2 terabytes, 2 terabytes, and you introduce an 8 terabyte, it will only see it as 2. And also, the RAID will be very unstable because of the mixture of those drives and their different speeds, caches, and more. So do bear that in mind when buying between these two, that the SHR RAID system does give you better future-proofing in the long run. It's a shame QNAP doesn't have it, but there you go. And that's the main ways in which you can pick between Synology and QNAP. And I think what it comes down to is if you're more of a technical mind and you like to fiddle and you know your way around a PC, go for the QNAP. The QNAP gives you far more analytical technical information and is far more user-friendly to the more technically IT versed. You don't need to be out of this world technically versed, but because the hardware options are better and greater, there's a better coverage for someone of a more technical mind. If you've never built a PC, you're someone that the limits of your technical knowledge goes as far as Microsoft Word, and you want something that sits there, does the job, and you never have to muck around with, go for a Synology. There are, of course, exceptions to the rule, but these are the main ways in which we can tell between these two NAS vendors. If you want to learn more, do visit the article down there in the description in the comments, and if you've got a question about the right NAS for you, pop it in the comments. But otherwise, if you enjoyed this video and found it useful, visit me at nascompares.com, and don't forget to click like and subscribe to support this channel and keep these videos releasing. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.